Vattelevision.
Lord Monckton, you've been here in the United States providing lectures at universities, and as recent as last Thursday, you provided a slide presentation to the California General Assembly in which not a single Democrat bothered to show up. Tell us about your U.S. tour and your impression of Americans, especially our students, and their perception of global warming.
Let's start with the State Assembly in California, in Sacramento. There was one Democrat who did come. A rather unusual man, I suppose one would call him a blue dog, Senator Wright, who comes from a solidly working class urban district in central Los Angeles, who had to fight or run when he was a kid. You had to do one or the other, and sometimes both. He came up the hard way, and he knows how difficult it is for working people to make ends meet, bring up their families in the kind of ghastly public school system and the ghastly welfare system, which demeans those who use it while at the same time providing them with the necessaries of life. And he made quite a long intervention, making it quite clear that he had studied the global warming issue, had understood it to a considerable depth, and he even lectured me on one or two points about it. He said I should have included them in my presentation. I was very careful not to answer back, because of course you only get half an hour in front of a legislature, so you can't put in the baby as well as the bathwater. It's one or the other. But he was very impressive, and there were also several Republicans there, and they of course are now taking much more of an interest in this, realizing that neither does the science stack up nor does the economics stack up. As for the students I've met, I suppose the most interesting meeting was at the Union College in Schenectady, upper New York State, where a very large turnout came, 150 people crammed into the lecture theatre. Perhaps it was closer to 200. Most of them were hostile to the point of view I was expressing. And there were some very angry, but largely ill-directed questions from 4 professors and several PhDs who had come along with the students, clearly with the aim of simply giving me the hardest time they could. And I think it's fair to say they didn't really succeed in landing a blow between them. And then they held a counter meeting in another lecture hall at which 60 people came. They were rather disappointed that my meeting had attracted more people than theirs had. At which they had charts and graphs showing everything with the vertical aspect exaggerated to the point of unreason, showing temperatures increasing, sea level rise, etc., etc. All of it very carefully cherry-picked to make the worst possible impression. And I suppose the most interesting moment of the lot was when I had shown, as I usually do in my presentations, the bogus graph from the IPCC's 2007 report, which quite incorrectly purports to show that the rate of warming is itself accelerating and that we are to blame. And I always demonstrate that this is a bogus technique, and by various methods I show that it's beyond question a bogus technique. There's really no argument about it, it's simply wrong. And so then, when the professor was trying to sum up their meeting, at which I had stuck up my hand and made a number of tiresome interventions, quoting scientific papers that none of them had obviously read, but giving a completely different gloss on the particular subjects they were talking about, eventually the professor rather lost his temper, and he said, look, he said, the fact is, you haven't really made out a case there's anything wrong with this. I said, yes, I have. Just take that one example of the bogus graph. I said there were several other examples of bogus graphs from the IPCC's documents, but that was one which anyone without any mathematical training at all could see was bogus once it was explained to them. So he turned to his students and said, hands up all those who agree with me that that graph was just fine. And 2/3 of the hands in the room went up. So I said, how many of those who have put their hands up are statisticians? I thought, right, if they can endlessly appeal to authority, I'll do the same game and see what happens. one hand went up halfway and came back down again, because the guy realized that if, as a statistician, he was trying to lend his name to a graph which he could see perfectly well was bogus, this would all be on television, and he would never really live it down. He had simply lied. So I then rounded on the professor and said, you shouldn't have done that. And then I turned to the students and I said, you should not have put your hands up. Every single one of you knows that that graph was wrong. But in deference to authority, you voted the way your professor wanted you to vote. Never do that again, I said. Science is about the pursuit of truth. And if you lie, then, for one thing, you can see just how hollow any notion of consensus is. If I were to take the number of people in this room, the number of people who voted that the graph was okay, there's a consensus that it was okay, when in fact it wasn't. And I said, this is the trouble. True science, which means independent checking and thinking, has been replaced by globalized groupthink. And you have abandoned and spat upon the very education that you ought to have been given here. By thinking like a herd in deference to the authority of your professor, whom you knew to be wrong, when you should have had the guts and the independence of mind to vote for yourselves and for the truth. And you could have heard a pin drop of young faces, bright red, hung with shame, all around the room. So I think a lot of these students are not being properly taught. As a result, they are thinking like, I call them the Borg. You're not perhaps a Trekkie, but in Star Trek there is an alien race known as the Borg, who are effectively a kind of hive mind. And once you are assimilated into the Borg, you can no longer think for yourself. You think only with the mind of the hive, and you do what the Queen Bee wants you to do. And you become effectively no better than a robot. So I call these folk on the environmental hard left the Borg, because they don't care what is true and what is not in science or about global warming. Once they are told what the party line is, and they will call that the consensus rather than admitting it's the party line handed down by the central committee of the hive. Once they're told what the party line is, they turn off what little brains they may have, for if they had any, they wouldn't be part of the hive mind. And they stop thinking, and they actually become offended and angry if anyone says, hang on a moment, guys, the party line doesn't make any sense at all. It's just like that wonderful moment in 1984, where, by George Orwell, where the Communist Party orator is spouting the party line, the consensus, angrily and attacking those who oppose it. A note is handed up to him, announcing that the party line has changed by 180 degrees. And in mid-sentence, he begins attacking everything he has said previously in that speech, and says the precise opposite. And nobody in the audience bats an eyelid. That's where we are now with a lot of American education. It's very dangerous, and if it is not reversed, that's the end of the United States and this upcoming generation, who have been taught in this fashion, simply to parrot the party line rather than thinking independently for themselves. They have nothing to contribute, and their nation has no future.
Now, speaking of the pursuit of truth, you were recently on Dennis Miller's radio show.
Yes.
You made a comment that caught the attention of many of us who have been in this pursuit of the truth regarding the origins of Barack Obama. You specifically told Dennis that you believed he should take this issue quite seriously. And why do you believe it is that he should take it quite seriously?
First of all, I have no idea where Barack Obama was born. And so in that sense, I am not a birther as it is defined. I have no idea where he was born. I've seen enormous numbers of bogus Kenyan birth certificates, for instance. But I have every good reason to believe that none of those that I've seen comes anywhere close to being a true document. What is very plain, though, is that the purported Hawaiian birth certificate that is on the White House website and has been there since last May is manifestly in your face bogus. And that disturbs me, because within 24 hours of that being posted up and of Obama standing up in a press conference and saying, we have put up this birth certificate, he lent his own authority to it. Zitty teenagers who understand these calculating engines, or computers as I believe they are called, had exposed what had been done. They had gone into a program called Adobe Illustrator, which is able to disaggregate an image into different layers, showing how it was created. And what should have been a single scan distributed at random over the different layers so as to compose the picture had clearly been compiled from several different scans where, for instance, the 3 date stamps and the registrar's stamp did not appear scattered among the layers as they would have done just like everything else on the document if it had been legitimately scanned, but instead were on individual layers each of their own and could therefore be picked up and moved around the document. Now, no scanned document, which was a copy of an original, obviously from a bound volume, could possibly look like that. So somebody has tampered with that and compiled it from several different bits and pieces and artificially put it together, which you wouldn't go to the trouble to do, so it seems to me, if all you had to do was to take the original document and scan it. So I can't understand why that was done. And what one can say, and one can say for certain, as Sheriff Arpaio here in Maricopa County, Arizona, has indeed said, is that this is a bogus document. It is a forged document. It is a document appearing on a federal website in furtherance of the future candidature and indeed existing presidency of your highest officer of state. This is no small matter. And the sheriff, whom I had the honour of meeting yesterday, and what a splendid character he is as baffled as everyone is that your news media, your champions of freedom and the American way, have virtually nothing to say about the fact that their chief executive has put up on his website, White House website, a document that is plainly forged. And that is the conclusion of the investigative team that I had the pleasure of meeting yesterday. They explained how they'd done what they'd done. They'd had experts from all over the country looking at this, all of it at no expense to the taxpayer, because this is a cold case posse. The sheriff didn't feel that he could allocate the resources of the state to that. In my view, given the seriousness of what's been done, I think he should be allocating taxpayers' resources to this. This is clearly a matter of interest to every single United States citizen. Your Constitution, as best I understand it, plainly provides that in order to be President of the United States, you have to be a natural-born citizen. Well, now the rules appear to be changed. All you have to be is, whether you're a natural-born citizen or not, as long as you can produce a manifestly forged birth certificate from the state of Hawaii, you can stand. I mean, you might as well run me for president, and I'd probably get more votes than Obama if I did. Only the difference would be that I would admit that my Hawaiian birth certificate was forged, whereas he somehow isn't admitting that.
Well, what correlation can you draw between the entity that you've been up against with the global warming battle and those that we have been fighting in this pursuit of the truth of Barack Obama's origins? And not only the correlations of the entity itself, but what tactics do they use to silence you and us?
There's clearly a link in that the president is very much from the hard left. I never thought to see such a man elected to office in the United States. When I gave a press conference at the Willard Hotel shortly after he was elected, I described him quite openly as a communist. His background, his history, what he said during the campaign makes it quite plain that that is what he is. He may not carry a card saying, I'm a Marxist, but it's very difficult to tell the difference between him and a Marxist when you look at his policies, you look at what he's done, and you look at what he's said, and you look at who he appointed to various offices. The name Van Jones springs to mind, for instance. And the doyen of the press corps called me on one side, John Gizzy of Human Affairs, and he said, "Oh boy, we don't use the word communist. It has connotations here and McCarthyism and all that. We try to tone it down a little." And so in his subsequent article reporting the press conference on the front page of Human Affairs, wherever I had said communist, he changed the text to very extreme socialist. I thought that was very endearing, particularly because 6 months later he himself was openly describing Obama in his column as a communist. So I think there is a general agreement that Obama is about as far to the left as you can go without being Fidel Castro. He's very extreme. And it is also notable, surely, that those who argue most vigorously and persistently and venomously in favour of the more extreme position on how terrible climate change is going to be are also from the hard left, this time the environmental hard left. My late friend Eric Ellington, one of the founders of Greenpeace, used to say that he had to leave Greenpeace, as many of his fellow founders did a few years after it was founded, because the Marxists came in and took it over. And because the original founders of Greenpeace, like him, were completely non-political, they didn't know how to fend this off, and the organisation was taken over and has been redirected ever since towards matters which have nothing to do with the environment, except as an excuse for introducing avowedly Marxist policies. So clearly you have the hard left in the White House, you have the hard left pursuing the so-called green agenda, which is really the red agenda. And the connection between the two is therefore very strong, and the methods that they use to try to shut down dissent are the same. And I suppose that the most outstanding of their tactics, the most obvious of their tactics, is the personal vilification of anyone who dares to resist the party line, to resist the consensus that Obama is the chosen one and cannot be touched, even if his birth certificate is completely bogus, even if he did come from Kenya or wherever else he may have come from, I don't know. That he should be untouchable simply because he's hard left and we've got him into the White House and 3 cheers, let's not ask any questions. And then you've got the same with the climate thing, where again the hard left wants this because it's a great way of utterly destroying the United States in particular and the West in general, taking apart our economies from within without a shot being fired. And that is this nihilism, this destructiveness of the hard left, the socialist or communist left, is something very disfiguring, but the tactics that they use are from Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, I think they're called. And one of these rules, not the least of them, is that the capitalists have all the best arguments and are very sophisticated in debate because they know the facts and they tend to be right. So the only way to stop them is to attack them personally and go on and on and on doing so until their reputations are in tatters and nobody, even on their own side, feels comfortable listening to them again. And that's what's happened, both to me on the global warming thing and indeed to everybody else like me who has dared to say, hang on guys, there really isn't that much of a problem here, and even if there were, it's cheaper to do nothing about it than to spend all these fortunes trying to make this go away. And the same with the birth certificate. Anyone who pops up their head above the parapet and says, well, wait a minute, this really can't be right, it's clearly forged, is immediately labelled, they even invented a word for it, a birther. A new kind of lunatic, if you like. And so when I made this chance remark on the Dennis Miller show, he said, what else are you doing in the United States? I said, well, I'm looking at this question because it's suddenly come across my bows and it seems to me to be interesting. You could hear how shocked he was that I had indicated that I had my doubts about this and was willing to say so. Because, of course, if he were to look at the evidence, he would come to the same conclusion everyone who looks at the evidence comes to on this birth certificate question. But he, unlike me, would not dare to say so because he would fear the vilification that would then be flung upon him, heaped upon him by the hard left. And that is something which I, as a peer of the realm, don't mind. I mean, you can call me any names you like. I might sue from time to time to stop the more unpleasant and persistent ones. But on the whole, you can take these hard knocks, because I don't have an allegiance to any particular party in the UK Parliament. I can say what I think, and I'm beholden to no one, so there's nothing they can do to me, and therefore I don't mind being called names as long as it's kind of within some sort of reasonable basis. But Most people have careers and jobs and are terrified that their employers might find out that all over the internet they're being called foul names by the organised teams of paid hacks who go around the internet messing around with Wikipedia biography pages, and Wikipedia is entirely on their side, so they can do what they like there. Wikipedia won't stop them. That has now become an instrument of political indoctrination. It's no longer an entity you can rely upon for sound information. They will put up rude things wherever they can and just destroy reputations. That's what they do. And that's, the sheriff was saying yesterday, he couldn't understand why the press weren't picking this up, and he thought there was some kind of giant conspiracy. Well, there is, but it's a different one than what he may think. It is that anyone who dares to speak up on this, as on global warming, is so vilified and over again vilified that the intention is to make sure that anybody else who might think of popping their head above the parapet and saying, hang on a moment, is immediately terrified of doing so, and is frightened and cowed and bullied into silence.
So, do you believe that we are right in pursuing, regardless of what the response is from their side? Should we be stalwart in our efforts to get to the bottom of this, to find the truth?
What is the question that underlies all true human enquiry? It is Pontius Pilate's question. Quid est veritas? What is the truth? And anyone who is asking an honest question wants to know, what is the truth? What is the truth about a birth certificate which is manifestly forged? Why did they forge it? Who forged it? What are they covering for? These are legitimate questions about your chief executive now. They would not have been particularly legitimate before he put up this bogus document, because then, all right, there wasn't any hard evidence that he was born in the United States, but there wasn't any hard evidence that anyone should raise any particular question about it. But once he had put up on the White House website a document which is a manifest forgery, then you no longer have to be a birther to realize that questions have to be asked about that. Why did Pontius Pilate ask that question? Because our blessed Lord, just moments before, had said, ego in hoc natus sum, et ad hoc veni in mundo, ut testimonium percipiam veritati. For this was I born, unto this came I into the world, that I might bear witness unto the truth. And I said that in Latin because it is quite likely that the exchange took place in Latin. And that is what everyone should do, to bear witness to the truth. That's what we're here to do, to try to find the truth and stand up for it, and not be cowed or bullied by the hard left or by anyone into silence. And somehow, if we are to save the West, we have to get back to the idea that it doesn't matter how many bullies try to keep us quiet, try to shut us up, try to poke fun at us, destroy our reputations, make us a laughing stock. It is still necessary, quietly and honestly, to pursue the truth, whether it be about global warming, whether it be about why a bogus birth certificate is up on the White House website. We just have to find out where the truth truly is, and then, once we've made our best endeavours to find out, then we should say what it is, and we should be willing to say it publicly without fear of the bullying that we are now subjected to. And I think it's getting to the point where the kind of organised character assassination that goes beyond what the founding fathers of the United States had in mind when they were talking of the right of free speech. And I think that what the left are doing, in fact, constitutes a kind of hate speech, and that kind of extreme personality assassination, character assassination, should be unlawful in a criminal sense. And I think that would rein them in pretty quickly. If they realized that by going around accusing people of lying when they're not, accusing people of making stuff up when they haven't, making all these unpleasant accusations, if they go on and on and on doing that, then just as in Britain there used to be the law of criminal libel, where if you had no justification for this and you did it in an organized pattern, and somebody appeared even to be coordinating it, then you could be done for criminal libel because you were effectively destroying someone's life. That should now be the law here, that anyone who does that, whether it's on the internet or anywhere else, can be picked up, prosecuted for criminal libel, and shoved in jail to remind them that character assassination that departs from the truth is not appropriate. So, for instance, if I say, well, there are legitimate questions about Obama's place of birth, given that the document that he has put up on the website saying that he was born in Hawaii has question marks about it, that would be acceptable because I'm raising a legitimate question and it's clear there's a bogus document there. Supposing that document contained no evidence that it was bogus, and I went round saying that, then I should be done for raising questions that are improper to raise in the circumstances. But where there's clear evidence of wrongdoing, then I find it horrifying that the left should have terrified everyone into silence and bullied them into silence. And I'm very impressed with all of you here who are either members of or associates of the cold case posse that's been looking at this birth certificate. I hope that you succeed in getting to the bottom of it. And it may be that when all is said and done, Obama really was born in Hawaii, but the simplest way for that to be demonstrated, and it can be done in 24 hours, is to get the original document and display it. And if they don't still have it on paper, let them produce the microfilm from which they say the document on the White House website was taken, and let them subject that roll of microfilm to the scrutiny of independent forensic experts to make sure they haven't been sitting in a laboratory for months cobbling it together to try and provide ex post facto justification for what's appeared on the White House website. That, if the document is genuine, can be done within 24 hours and dispel all questions. And I think the biggest question that I have about this whole issue is why the heck hasn't Obama done the obvious if this document is genuine? Why hasn't he said to the courts in Hawaii or to the registrar in Hawaii, please make the original document available to forensic experts for examination? In Britain, if you wanted to know when and where I was born, then you simply go to the registrar of births and deaths and say, I want the birth certificate of Monckton, born at such and such a time and place on such and such a day. And they'll give it to you. There won't be any argument about it. You won't have to go to court to get it. It's a public document. The fact that somebody was born is not a state secret. And I don't see why it should be a state secret here. All he has to do is get the forensic experts in, independently appointed. He could even go to a court and get the judge to appoint them completely independently if he wanted. It could be done in 24 hours. The whole question would die down overnight, and everybody would collapse in gales of laughter at all of those who've been trying to pursue what can then genuinely be made out to have been some sort of conspiracy theory, except for one thing, that the document on the website is definitely bogus. And that, I think, is where the difficulty lies. They can't do this, because even if there is a genuine document there, they've still created a bogus document on the White House website. There's still a fraud there, which would immediately become apparent once the original document was seen. And people might say, why the heck has this fraud been done? But that document is fraudulent, is clear, and would become clearer still once it was compared with the original document, even if the original document exists. But I'm afraid the suspicion has to be at least entertained that no such original document does exist, for I can't think of any other rational explanation why anyone would want to fabricate a document which they could simply scan from the original record.
Well, we're really honored and so grateful that you took a few minutes to talk with us and give us your insights on this this battle that we've been fighting for a few years now. And we look forward to hear what else you might have to say as things progress.
Well, thank you very much, and God bless Arizona, and God bless America.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vattelevision.